The engine, once a roaring heartbeat of defiance, now sits cold, a skeletal monument of rusted steel and broken dreams. We see a man standing amidst the graveyard of heavy machinery, his breath hitching in the frigid morning air, not from the cold, but from the weight of a legacy that dissolved like salt in the rain. Kevin Cunningham didn't just build a business. He forged an identity out of grease, grit, and the unyielding belief that a man's worth was measured by the calluses on his hands. But what happens when the very empire you bled for becomes the altar upon which your peace is sacrificed? When the cameras stop rolling and the digital cheers fade into a deafening, hollow silence, who is left standing in the wreckage of a life built on bigger and better? How does a titan of the industry lose everything, only to find that the heaviest burden wasn't the equipment, but the ghost of who he used to be? The frame opens on a world devoid of color, a landscape of frozen Indiana mud, and the skeletal remains of rusted iron. This is not the gleaming showroom of a success story. It is the graveyard where a boy first learned that the world offers nothing for free. The air here is heavy, thick with the scent of oxidized metal and the acrid, lingering ghost of burnt diesel. We see Kevin as a young man, his silhouette small against the towering indifference of the machinery he seeks to tame. His hands, even then, are a map of survival, split knuckles and grease-stained cuticles that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly clean. For Kevin, the engine was more than a machine. It was a sanctuary of logic in a life defined by the chaotic instability of poverty. An engine, if treated with respect, would always provide an answer. It didn't lie, it didn't leave, and it didn't care about the name on the birth certificate. The sun rises and sets over the workshop in a repetitive, grueling cycle. Yet Kevin remains a fixture against the concrete floor. He is a ghost haunting his own ambition. We see the breath mist of 18-hour days rising in the frigid air, a silent testament to a work ethic that was less about passion and more about a desperate, clawing flight from insignificance. Every wrench turn was a strike against the fear of being forgotten. He was building a kingdom out of scrap, finding discarded husks of excavators and breathing life back into their steel lungs. Each sail was a brick in a wall he was building between himself and the hunger of his youth. But walls do more than protect. They enclose. As the scenes transition, the flicker of a single light bulb in the shop gives way to the harsh, sterile glow of a rising business. The first major contract sits on a scarred wooden desk, its ink still wet, representing the kind of money that once felt like a fairy tale. He should feel the weight of victory, the soaring release of a man who has finally outrun his demons. Instead, the camera lingers on the way his hand trembles as he puts the pen down. The silence of the shop, once a comfort, now feels predatory. He has become a master of restoration, able to fix any hydraulic leak or shattered gear, yet he is becoming increasingly blind to the mechanical failure of his own spirit. He is isolated by his own drive, a captain who has spent so much time in the engine room that he no longer knows how to stand on the deck and look at the sea. He moves toward the small, grime-streaked bathroom at the back of the facility. The sound of a dripping faucet echoes like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds of a peace he can no longer afford. He splashes cold water on his face, trying to wash away the exhaustion that has become a permanent layer of his skin. When he finally looks up, the camera pulls in tight on the mirror. The man looking back is a stranger, a hardened shell of the boy who just wanted to be safe. His eyes are hollowed out by a hunger that success failed to feed. As he leans in, a sharp, sudden tremor radiates from his chest to his fingertips, and the reflection seems to distort. The foundation hasn't just cracked. It is beginning to dissolve. The shadow in the mirror doesn't blink, leaving us to wonder. Is the man breaking the machine, or is the machine finally breaking the man? The lens shifts from the grainy, flickering shadows of the workshop to the blinding, clinical brilliance of a high-definition screen. The world has changed. The smell of diesel is now masked by the sterile hum of servers and the electric glow of a global audience. Kevin Cunningham is no longer just a man in a shop. He is an icon, a digital monarch presiding over an empire of iron and pixels. We see him through the viewfinder of a camera, perfectly framed, charismatic, the personification of the American dream. To the millions watching, he is the invincible architect of restoration, a titan who can fix anything with a wrench and a smile. But as the record light flickers red, the camera captures a truth the audience chooses to ignore. The subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes dart toward the mounting piles of paperwork just out of frame, and the heavy, rhythmic thrum of a heart under siege. The inventory has transformed into a sprawling, metallic labyrinth that stretches toward the horizon. Hundreds of machines, excavators, dozers, loaders, sit like silent, expectant gargoyles, each one representing a promise made, a debt incurred, or a deadline looming. The psychological landscape of this era is one of suffocating density. Every machine is a living entity requiring his attention, his capital, and his fading energy. The narrator's voice becomes a low, reflective murmur as we explore the internal architecture of this peak fame. Kevin has become a character in his own life, a man performing the role of Kevin from CNC, while the sentient human underneath is slowly drowning in the mechanics of his own success. He is the sun around which 100 employees and 1 million followers orbit, yet he is freezing in the vacuum of his own leadership. He cannot show weakness. He cannot admit that the crown is made of lead. We transition into the deep, indigo hours of the night. The crowds have gone home, the cameras are packed away, and the digital cheers have faded into the hollow static of the internet. Kevin walks the yard alone, a flashlight cutting a lonely path through the fog that rolls off the Indiana fields. The sound of his boots on the gravel is the only heartbeat in this kingdom of steel. He is a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own construction, realizing that the more he built, the less room he had to breathe. The joy of the mechanical has been replaced by the math of survival, payroll, logistics, the relentless demand for more content, more machines, more perfection. He is a master of hydraulics who can no longer find the pressure release valve for his own mind. The internal gears are grinding, metal on metal, sparking in the dark as the lubrication of purpose is burned away by the friction of expectation. The scene tightens, focusing on the stark, blue light of his smartphone illuminating his weathered face. He is checking the late-night inventory logs, a ritual of control in a life spiraling out of his grasp. The silence of the yard is absolute, a heavy velvet shroud that makes the sudden, shrill vibration of his phone feel like a physical blow. He looks at the screen, an unknown number, a call at an hour meant only for emergencies or endings. He answers, his voice a gravelly whisper that barely carries in the night air. As he listens, the flashlight in his other hand begins to waver, its beam dancing erratically across the yellow paint of a nearby excavator. The news delivered through the receiver is a cold blade, severing the final thread of his composure. The king is still standing, but his kingdom has just become a mausoleum. The flashlight falls, its beam buried in the dirt, as the voice on the other end of the line demands an answer for a catastrophe that cannot be undone. The cinematic frame bleeds from the electric blue of a digital empire into the sickly, jaundiced gray of a winter that refuses to end. The collapse of CNC equipment was not a singular, thunderous explosion. It was the sound of 1,000 microscopic fractures finally meeting in the center of the foundation. We see Kevin in a sequence of dissolving scenes, the vibrant, commanding figure from the screen replaced by a man whose skin seems too tight for his bones. The economic winds have shifted, turning the massive inventory from assets into anchors, pulling him deeper into a cold, dark sea of liability. But the true erosion is internal. The Japanese walking method, he once researched for vitality, now feels like a cruel irony as he paces the cavernous shop floor, his own biological clock ticking with a frantic, irregular rhythm. The monster he built has grown too large to be fed, and now it has begun to feed on him. The decision to let go is not a choice. It is a surrender. We transition to the day of the final auction, a scene rendered in slow, agonizing motion. The yard, once a temple of industry, has become a butcher shop. We hear the rhythmic, machine gun rattle of the auctioneer's chant, a cold and hollow sound that strips the soul from the steel. Each sold is a physical blow, a piece of Kevin's identity hammered away to the highest bidder. We see him standing at the periphery, a ghost at his own funeral, watching decades of sweat and callous dreams being loaded onto trailers and driven away by strangers. The narrator explores the profound psychological identity death occurring in this vacuum. Without the grease on his hands, without the roar of a refurbished cat engine, the mirror offers no reflection. Kevin Cunningham, the man, had been entirely consumed by Kevin Cunningham, the brand, and as the brand dissolves, the man is left standing in a terrifying, naked silence. The aftermath is a descent into the dark night of the soul. The vibrant shop, once buzzing with the electricity of ambition and the camaraderie of the Mats Off-Road and Diesel Brothers era, is now a hollow shell. The camera moves through the empty bays, capturing the dust motes dancing in the shafts of lonely afternoon light. The silence is not peaceful. It is accusatory. It is a profound, existential isolation. He retreats into the shadows of his own mind, haunted by the crushing guilt of a dream that he feels has failed the family and the employees who look to him as a titan. He is a captain without a ship, a mechanic without a tool, wandering the echoing remains of his life. The what-ifs are a chorus of whispers that follow him from room to room, mocking the man who once thought he could outwork destiny. His heart, long accustomed to the high-octane tempo of crisis management, now thrums with a heavy, hollow ache, struggling to find a rhythm in a world without deadlines or demands. He sinks onto a scarred wooden stool behind a workbench that was once his sanctuary. The air is cold, smelling only of stale dust and regret. As he reaches into the dark crevice between the bench and the wall to steady himself, his fingers brush against something thin and brittle. He pulls it out, an old, forgotten photograph, curled at the edges and stained with the grease of a younger, simpler man. As he wipes away the grime of years, the image reveals a truth so sharp it cuts through the fog of his despair. It is a relic from the beginning, a moment captured before the cameras, before the fame, and before the weight. His breath hitches as he realizes that the boy in the photo was never looking at the machine. He was looking at something else entirely, something Kevin had spent 20 years trying to bury under iron. The frame transitions from the suffocating gloom of the empty workshop to the pale, fragile light of an Indiana dawn. The air is no longer thick with the scent of anxiety or the metallic tang of debt. It is crisp, smelling of damp earth and the quiet promise of a world that continues to spin without the permission of a CEO. We see Kevin moving through the ruins of his former empire, but his gait has changed. The frantic, heavy tread of a man pursued by ghosts has been replaced by the slow, deliberate pace of a man learning how to walk for himself. This is the architecture of rebirth, a reconstruction that requires no steel, no hydraulics, and no digital validation. The narrator's voice is a gentle, resonant anchor as we witness the internal acquisition of peace. Kevin is navigating the aftermath not as a victim of a collapse, but as a survivor of a storm he once mistook for home. The journey through the deep darkness toward this quieter purpose was not a leap, but a grueling crawl. We see sequences of his new reality. The absence of the Mats Off-Road chaos, the silence of a phone that no longer screams with the demands of 1,000 frantic logistics. He is learning a new language, one of boundaries and breadth. The resilience he once applied to the restoration of shattered excavators is finally being redirected inward. He realizes that his value was never a commodity to be sold or a metric to be tracked on a dashboard. It was the fire he forged in the furnace of his own struggles. He is stripping away the Kevin from CNC armor, layer by painful layer, finding that the man underneath is not empty, but merely tired. The high-retention storytelling of his life is finally reaching its most honest chapter, the one where the protagonist chooses to survive. The documentary reaches its poetic zenith as we see Kevin standing in the center of the yard, now a clean, open expanse of grass and gravel. He is no longer the mogul of machinery, but a man who has successfully completed the most complex repair job of his career, the restoration of his own soul. The camera pans across the horizon, capturing a bittersweet sunrise that bathes the fields in a soft, amber glow. The landscape is no longer dominated by the jagged silhouettes of a massive inventory. It is illuminated by the clarity of a man who is finally, devastatingly free. The engines that once defined his heartbeat are silent, and in that silence, Kevin can finally hear the cadence of his own thoughts. He is no longer a character in a digital narrative. He is a human being in the quiet morning air. The camera slowly pulls back, leaving Kevin a small, resolute figure against the vast Indiana sky. It glides into the shop one last time, coming to rest on a single, well-worn wrench sitting on a clean workbench. The narrator's final words hang in the air like a lingering mist. We spend our lives building monuments to our own strength, convinced that the world will forget us if we stop. But perhaps the greatest victory is not found in the accumulation of iron. Is a man truly successful when he gains the world, or when he finally finds the courage to walk away from it?